Welcome to the deep dive.
Okay, forget the beaches for a moment because today we're heading to ancient Australia. We're going to dig into the story of a really remarkable predator, Australovenator.
Exactly. And we've got some, well, fascinating scientific material to go through on this southern hunter. Everything from, the moment its bones were first unearthed
Right.
to the ongoing research into its life, its environment.
And our mission for you today is pretty simple. We want to pull out the most interesting, the most important insights about this incredible creature,
Hmm.
give you a real understanding of Australovenator, its world in the late Cretaceous. Think of it as a quick but thorough journey. No getting bogged down.
A shortcut to the good stuff.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. So the story kicks off back in 2006, right?
It does, yeah. The first discovery happened at a place called the Matilda site. That's near Winton in Queensland.
Queen is okay.
And quite remarkably, the first fossils of Australovenator wintonensis, they were found mixed in with the remains of a sauropod, a big plant eater called Diamaninosus matildae. Wow, wait. Found together,
Yeah.
like in the same deposit.
In same deposit, yeah. Talk about finding two giants in one spot.
An ancient double feature. And the
Mhm.
main specimen, the holotype, that's like the official reference fossil.
That's the one, yeah. Cataloged as AODF 604. It even got a nickname, Banjo,
Not Joe. Why banjo?
after the Australian poet Banjo Patterson.
Ah, okay. Waltzing Matilda. Right.
Yeah.
Very fitting.
Very fitting. It's always nice when these ancient bones get a bit of personality, you know?
Totally. So what did these initial banjo finds actually include? What bits did they find?
Well, the first haul included a left dentary that's part of the lower jaw,
Okay.
some teeth, parts of the forelimbs and hind limbs, a piece of the right ilium, that's a hip bone,
Hip bone, right.
and also ribs and gastralia, sometimes called belly ribs.
Pelly ribs. Interesting.
Yeah. And all these pieces, they're now carefully kept at the Australian Age of Dinosaurs Museum of Natural History.
Okay, so banjo was starting to take shape.
Mm-hmm.
And the official name, Australovenator wintonensis. How did that come about?
Well, the genus name, Australovenator, it's pretty descriptive. It basically means southern hunter.
Southern hunter. Makes sense for Australia.
Apt, right. And the species name, wintonensis, that refers to the nearby town Winton, where it was found.
Okay.
The formal naming, the first detailed description, that was published in 2009 by Scott Hocknull and his colleagues.
And it sounds like this Matilda site is still producing fossils.
Yeah.
We're still learning more about banjo.
Oh, absolutely. The digging there is ongoing. And it's actually amazing how much more has come out since that first paper.
Like what?
Well, for instance, more details on its arm bones came out in 2012.
Okay.
And then in 2013, we got more descriptions of leg bones and even a right dentary, the other side of the lower jaw.
So the picture keeps getting clearer.
Exactly. It really shows you how meticulous this work is. It doesn't just stop.
Right. Okay, so we got this picture of banjo emerging. Let's really get into the good stuff. What did this southern hunter actually look like? How big are we talking?
Size estimates, well, they varied a bit. That's pretty common when you're working with incomplete skeletons.
Sure.
Initially, Gregory S. Paul suggested maybe 6 meters long. That's about 20 feet.
20 feet. Okay, decent size.
Yeah, and a weight around 500 kilograms, so like 1,100 pounds.
Mm.
But then a later study in 2014 suggested it might have been a bit lighter, maybe closer to 310 kilograms, which is around 680 pounds.
Oh, that's quite a difference in weight. Almost half. Does that change how we think about it?
It could, yeah. Lighter might mean faster, more agile. It often comes down to, different methods, which bones you have available.
Right.
But regardless of the exact weight, the image that Scott Hocknull painted really sticks. He called Australovenator the cheetah of its time.
The cheetah. Okay, now that paints a picture. Why cheetah?
Well, it points to its likely lifestyle. The build seems relatively lightweight, kind of slender, which suggests it was probably built for agility, maybe speed, compared to some bulkier predators.
So fast and nimble. Was it the only fast predator around?
Well, it was likely a top predator in its specific environment, yes. But the Winton Formation had other dinosaurs, including other theropods, we think. So, it wouldn't have been totally alone. There would have been a complex ecosystem.
Okay.
And of course, it was bipedal, walked on 2 legs. A carnivore.
So definitely not slow and lumbering. Much more dynamic.
Yeah.
What else do we know about his physical abilities? Anything stand out?
Oh, definitely. One of the most striking findings came from a study in 2015. They used computer modeling.
Computer modeling?
Oh.
For what?
To figure out the range of motion in its arms. And the results were, Well, pretty surprising. They found an unusual amount of flexibility.
Flexible arms on a big predator. That seems counterintuitive. How flexible?
The study showed the forearms could move through a really wide angle relative to the humerus, the upper arm bone, from about 144 degrees down to 66 degrees.
Okay. What does that compare to?
Well, that range is actually very similar to what you see in modern birds.
Birds. Seriously.
Seriously. And quite different from most other non-avian dinosaurs. It's this sort of convergence, maybe, hinting at different pressures on forelimb use.
Wow. Bird-like flexibility. What could it do with that?
And it gets weirder. One of the forearm bones, the radius, it could apparently slide independently of the other forearm bone, the ulna, especially when the arm was flexed.
Slide independently.
Yeah, another feature you see in birds contributes to their complex wing movements.
So almost like an extra joint or something in the wrist. That's wild. What about the hands, the fingers?
Even more interesting, maybe, the study found its fingers could extend way further back than almost any other theropod they looked at.
Extend further, like backwards.
Yeah, really flexible extension. Only one other dinosaur, Dilophosaurus, showed something comparable. It strongly suggests, a very specific way of using those hands.
So these weren't just small, useless arms like on a T-Rex. What was the point of all this flexibility and finger extension? How did it hunt?
Well, the conclusion was that these flexible arms and hands were probably crucial for catching prey.
How so?
It could likely grasp its victims, really grab onto them and then pull them in towards its chest.
Ah, grappling.
Exactly. And this would be especially useful because its skull, its jaws, they seem relatively gracile or slender, maybe not built for a massive bone-crushing bite like some other big predators.
So the arms did the holding.
Right. Secure the prey with the arms and then use the teeth and jaws, perhaps for, disemboweling or slicing. The arms compensate for maybe weaker jaws?
A sophisticated grapple-and-slash technique. That's a vivid image. Okay, let's move down from the arms. What about the feet? Did they tell us anything?
I did, yeah. There was a really neat study in 2016. They used CT scans of a modern emu foot.
An emu? Why an emu?
To help reconstruct the soft tissues, the muscles, tendons of Australovenator's foot. Because, we usually only have the bones, but soft tissue is crucial for understanding actual movement and flexibility.
That's clever. Using a modern analog, what did they find out?
Well, one key thing was that just looking at bones alone can sometimes make us overestimate how flexible a joint was. The soft tissues constrain things.
Okay, makes sense.
They also relooked at some toe bones and noticed one, phalanx T3, seemed kind of splayed, maybe damaged.
Damaged?
They thought it might be a pathology, an injury, possibly from the stress of kicking motions.
Kicking? Like using its feet as weapons?
Yeah.
Are we talking Velociraptor-style claws?
Well, maybe not exactly like that, but they did draw a comparison to modern cassowaries.
Cassowaries, those big Aussie birds with the killer claws.
Exactly. Cassowaries have that specialized sharp claw on their inner toe they use for fighting or defense. So it raises this really interesting possibility that Australovenator might have used its feet in a similar, maybe weaponized way.
Wow. An Australian predator using tactics like a modern Australian bird. That's cool. And footprints. Did they find any tracks?
Ah, yes. There was a 2017 study related to that. They actually 3D printed an Australovenator foot model based on the reconstructions.
They 3D printed a dinosaur foot.
Yeah, and then they used it to make artificial footprints in different materials, like clay and sand.
Why? What were they trying to figure out?
The main goal was to shed light on some controversial dinosaur footprints found at a place called Lark Quarry.
Lark Quarry. I've heard of that. The dinosaur stampede site.
That's the one. There's been debate about what kind of dinosaur made some of the large three-toed tracks there. Some thought a large theropod, like Australovenator. Others suggested an ornithopod, like Muttaburrasaurus.
Okay, so did the 3D printed foot solve the mystery?
Well, the study found that the tracks made by their Australovenator model did look quite similar to the disputed tracks at Lark Quarry.
So leaning towards Australovenator then.
Their conclusion was that, the trackways were likely made by a large theropod, and something very much like Australovenator was a strong candidate. They did say they'd like to try it with a Muttaburrasaurus foot model too, but the foot fossils for that one are less complete.
Fascinating. So Australovenator might be the culprit behind those famous tracks, like solving a prehistoric cold case. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk family tree. Where does Australovenator fit in the grand scheme of dinosaur evolution?
Right, it's classification. So initial studies, phylogenetic analyses.
Building the family tree, basically?
Exactly. Those first analyses placed Australovenator among the allosauriid carnivores. That's a big group of predators.
Like Allosaurus.
Related, yes. It seemed closely related to Velociraptor, which is from Japan, and also the Carcharodontosauridae family.
The shark-toothed lizards, like Giganotosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus.
That's them. Massive predators. In some early trees, Australovenator was even put as the sister taxon, like the closest relative to the whole Carcharodontosauridae family.
So initially, it looked like it belonged with these absolute giants. Has that view changed?
It has, yeah. Later, more detailed studies suggested it belonged to a slightly different group within the allosaurids called the Neovenatoridae.
Neovenatoridae, okay. Who else is in that group?
Well, Neovenator itself, from Europe, and Chilentosaurus from Asia. Still big predators, sharing some features with Carcharodontosaurids, but a distinct branch.
Okay, so refinement. But I feel like there's another twist coming. Something about Megaraptora.
You got it. Australovenator is now pretty firmly placed within a clade called Megaraptora.
Megaraptora, giant thieves, right? Known for big hand claws.
That's the one. A really interesting group. But here's the thing. Where Megaraptor itself fits in the bigger theropod picture. Well, that's been a subject of quite a lot of debate.
Okay, so where Australovenator's group fits is uncertain. What are the options?
Well, for a long time, they were considered allosaurids, as we just discussed, but more recently, and this is quite a shift, some phylogenetic analyses suggest that Megaraptora, including Australovenator, might actually be tyrannosaurids.
Wait, tyrannosaurids? Related to T-Rex?
Related to the lineage that led to T-Rex, yeah. Maybe basal, early members of that group.
Whoa, from being a cousin of Carcharodontosaurus to maybe being an early relative of T-Rex? That's a huge jump.
It's a massive shift, and it really highlights how dynamic this field is. New fossils, new analytical methods. They can completely change our understanding of these deep relationships. It shows you just how challenging, but also how exciting paleontology can be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, sticking with relatives, what about another Australian dinosaur, Rapator? Is there a link there?
There is, yes. Rapator is another Australian megaraptoran, but for a long time, it was a real puzzle.
Why a puzzle?
Because it was originally named based on just a single bone, a hand bone, a metacarpal, found way back in the early 1900s.
Just one bone. Wow.
Yeah. And before Megaraptora was really understood as a distinct group, people weren't sure what Rapator was. Some thought maybe an alvarezsaurid, those weird little theropods with tiny, strong arms. Others just called it some kind of intermediate theropod. A bit of an enigma.
So how did Australovenator help clear things up for Rapator?
Well, once Australovenator was found and described, scientists could compare them. They noticed similarities. Although the first description of Australovenator noted some differences, a 2010 study formally reclassified Rapator as a megaraptoran. And it even suggested Rapator might be a sister taxon to Australovenator. Very closely related.
Closer to Australovenator than to, say, Megaraptor from South America.
That's what they suggested, yeah. Based on the features they could compare.
So for a time, they looked like potential siblings on the Aussie dino scene. Did that stick?
Not entirely. A later analysis in 2014 took a really close look specifically at the metacarpals, the hand bones, of both. And they concluded they were not synonymous, meaning they weren't the same animal. They found enough distinct features to say they were separate genera.
So different animals, but still closely related megaraptorans.
Exactly, like close cousins, maybe, but not identical twins living in Cretaceous Australia.
Okay.
Right.
Related, but distinct. And wasn't there something about an ankle bone, too? A bit of a mystery.
Ah, yes, the talus bone, part of the ankle.
Yeah.
There's an isolated Australian talus bone, specimen NMVP 150070. Haha. Yeah. Anyway, this bone had previously been assigned to Allosaurus, like the Allosaurus from North America.
Allosaurus in Australia, that seems unlikely.
Right. But the talus bones of Australovenator and also Velociraptor from Japan share similarities with this mystery Australian bone.
So the suggestion is this bone might actually belong to Australovenator? Or something like it, a case of mistaken identity.
That's one strong possibility, yeah. It fits better with the known fauna.
Is there another possibility?
There is. Some researchers have also pointed out similarities to Abelisaurs.
Ambulosaurs, another group of southern predators, right, like Carnotaurus.
Exactly. They were definitely around in the southern hemisphere. So this single ankle bone, it could be Australovenator or a relative, or maybe even an Abelisaur. It just shows how one bone can spark debate and potentially rewrite distribution maps.
It's like a tiny piece of a huge prehistoric jigsaw puzzle. Okay, let's place Australovenator in its world. What was its environment like? Where did Banjo live?
Well, based on that Matilda site, we know it lived in the lower part of the Winton Formation.
And when was that, roughly?
Geologically, it dates to the late Cenomanian stage. That's in the late Cretaceous period, around 95 million years ago.
95 million years ago.
Yeah.
And what was that spot in Queensland like back then?
The fossils themselves were found in clay, sandwiched between sandstone layers. The interpretation is that it was likely an Oxbow Lake deposit.
An oxbow lake, like a cut-off riverbed.
Exactly. Or what they call a billabong in Australia, a sort of still, quiet body of water.
So a watery grave, in a sense.
Here.
Who else was found in this ancient billabong?
Well, as we mentioned, the big sauropod Dimantanosaurus was right there with Australovenator.
Right, a double feature.
Yeah. But also fossils of bivalves like clams, fish, turtles, crocodilians.
Crocs, too. Busy place.
Definitely. And plant fossils, too. So it gives us this really nice snapshot of that specific little ecosystem.
A whole community preserved. What about the wider Winton Formation? What else was living in the area around that time?
Oh, the Winton Formation overall shows a really diverse fauna. Lots of invertebrates. There was the lingfish Metaceratidus, an early croc relative called Isisfordia. Pterosaurs flying overhead, definitely. And other dinosaurs besides Australovenator and Dimantinosaurus. There was another sauropod, Wintonatitan.
Okay.
We know there were ankylosaurians, the armored dinosaurs, though they're not fully named yet, and also small plant-eating ornithopods, hypsilophodonts.
So a real mix of big and small herbivores.
Yeah. And the plant life was diverse, too. Ferns, ginkgos, other gymnosperms, and significantly, the angiosperms flowering plants were starting to become more common.
So Australovenator was a major player in a pretty vibrant, complex prehistoric neighborhood.
Absolutely. A top predator in a bustling Cretaceous world.
Were there signs it lived elsewhere, or maybe at slightly different times?
That's an interesting question. There are some more fragmentary fossils from older rock formations in Australia, the Umarala Formation and the Wonthaggi Formation, which are Albian in age.
So older than the Winton Formation.
Yeah. Right. Maybe 10, 15 million years older. And some paleontologists think these bits and pieces might belong to Australovenator or something very close to it.
Suggesting the lineage was around for longer.
Potentially, yeah. It hints at a longer history for these kinds of predators in Australia. And also, more recently in 2020, they found another Megaraptoran fossil near the original Matilda site.
Another one, like Australovenator.
Similar, but apparently from an animal slightly larger than the original Banjo specimen. It was heavily eroded, but clearly a Megaraptoran.
So maybe more than one type, or just variation in size.
Exactly. It hints that there might have been more diversity within Megaraptora just in that Winton area than we initially thought.
So Australovenator and its kin were stalking Australia for quite a while during the Cretaceous. It's a really captivating glimpse into this lost world down under.
It really is. And Australovenator is so important because it's the most complete predatory dinosaur we have from Australia from that time. It gives us crucial insights into a period where the fossil record isn't as complete as, say, North America or Asia.
Well, this has been an absolutely fantastic deep dive into Australovenator. Let's just quickly recap the key takeaways for everyone listening.
Sounds good. So we covered its discovery near Winton, Queensland, the ongoing work piecing Banjo together.
Right, and the size estimates, that whole cheetah of its time idea, suggesting agility.
Exactly. And then those really unique features, the super flexible arms, the grasping hands, hinting at that specialized hunting strategy.
Yeah, the grappling. And we talked about its place on the family tree, that shifting classification. Was it an Allosauride? Maybe, surprisingly, an early Tyrannosaurid.
And its connection to other Aussie dinos like Raptor.
And finally, we placed it in its environment, that 95-million-year-old billabong in the Winton Formation, surrounded by sauropods, crocs, turtles, diverse plants.
A rich ecosystem.
Australovenator really is a standout fossil, the most complete Aussie predator, giving us priceless information about late Cretaceous life on the continent. Those unique arms, especially, just fire up the imagination about how it lived and hunted.
They really do. And maybe that leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given that its exact evolutionary position is still debated, was Australovenator closer to giants like Carcharodontosaurus, or was it actually an early cousin of T-Rex? What other secrets are still locked away in Australian rocks? What could the next fossil find tell us about its journey, its role as a top predator in that ancient world?
It's a great reminder, isn't it? that the story is still being written, literally etched in stone beneath our feet.
Absolutely. There's always more to discover.
A fantastic point to end on. Thanks so much for guiding us through the world of the Southern Hunter, and thanks to you for joining us on The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep digging.